Evaluating information. How do you think about the quality of information you come across? When you read articles in magazines and newspapers, how authoritative are they? Should you include website information in your research paper? Are published statistics credible? Is a government report likely to be biased? These are questions we may ask ourselves when we begin to do research at the college level. Thinking about information and its trustworthiness is something we call evaluating information. We all evaluate information constantly in our everyday lives. So let's look at an example of the ways that information can fall short of meeting a quality stress test. You're probably already familiar with the issue of bias. That is to say, when information is biased, it has a certain slant. Lots of published information takes a point of view, and the authors are upfront about it. Taking a point of view based on careful interpretation of all the facts is a normal part of getting at the truth. But when we use the term bias, we are usually referring to information that's aimed at shaping your beliefs or actions in a certain way, rather than arriving at truths. For example, a salesperson trying to sell you a car may give biased information about the car's value for several reasons. They probably stand to gain if you pay a high price for the car. It's also likely that company employees are expected to promote company products. And perhaps the salesperson doesn't have in-depth knowledge about cars made by competitors. Because you recognize that a salesperson could be giving you biased information, you have a pretty good idea of when you might need to use more than one source of information when deciding what to buy. For a slightly less biased source, you might look for information about a car in a trade magazine that reports on the features of many car makes and models. But you might still question the objectivity if the magazine appears to be supported by advertising from car manufacturers. And you might expect the least biased information to come from a consumer organization, again for several reasons. The reason for the organization to exist, its mission so to speak, is to give unbiased information to consumers. Consumer organizations often reveal their testing methods to further demonstrate their objectivity. For example, they might describe using experts to do sophisticated and rigorous testing. When consumer organizations share their testing methods, as well as their results with us, that transparency builds our confidence in their objectivity and in the quality of their information. If we're concerned about bias, what are we thinking about? What is the point of view of the author or speaker? Could there be issues of self-interest on the part of the author? Might there be issues of censorship or self-censorship? Does the source of information have expertise on the subject? Are easily verifiable facts being presented? Are all the relevant facts being presented? If one source might be biased, can I get relevant information from an unbiased source? When you think through what to believe about the car, you are evaluating information by putting it into a context, thinking about all the reasons why it might be biased. Now let's think about bias in the context of academic research. Consider a report from a think tank or a government agency making claims about climate change. You'll ask the same kinds of questions. Does the think tank have a known political bias? How is the think tank funded? Is the government agency relatively independent, or is it led by a politically appointed administrator? Do the researchers for the report come from a particular industry? Does the author have expertise and credentials respected by scholars? Can the facts be verified elsewhere? Thinking about and answering these questions is a way of trying to understand the social, political, and commercial context of information. Evaluating information often requires a little extra research. For example, in the case of the climate change report, you might investigate the credentials and expertise of the authors by trying to learn more about their career history and other works they've written. You can also look for reviews of the report written by other scientists. You might also investigate whether other scientists cite the same evidence and use it in the same way. Library staff can help you develop strategies for evaluating the objectivity of your sources. There are other ways besides objectivity in which information should be evaluated. You will want to evaluate information for these features: objectivity, accuracy, authority, currency, and completeness. First, let's think about accuracy. How can you know if a website is accurate, or if the statistics presented in a newspaper article are correct? One way to check for accuracy is to verify the information from a second source. Good quality information makes verification easier because authors provide citations for their sources. In other cases, you might assess the accuracy of information by evaluating the researcher's methodology. For example, when police and demonstrators give very different estimates for the number of participants at a public event, how did they arrive at their estimate? Or in the example of research results reported in a journal article, what was the methodology used in the survey or experiment? Authority. The very first question to ask about the authority of information is, who is the author? Who is accountable for this information? Once you have established authorship, you still need to decide if the author has appropriate credentials. Authoritativeness can be indicated through social position. For example, perhaps the work is written by a professor or published in a reputable national newspaper. But there are cases when experts in a subject may not fit a typical characterization. In this case, you have to look for clues about the author's level of knowledge. You can look for clues in secondary sources. Look for reviews of a work to see how other scholars evaluate it. You can examine the writing itself to see if the author is following good scholarly practice. When the author states a fact or makes an assertion, how transparently does he or she support the claim with evidence? Does the author cite sources, allowing readers to verify facts for themselves? Sometimes you have to make judgments based on what is credible. Even though you can't find reviews of your particular author, you might find scholarly work making the same kinds of claims, thereby lending a little more credibility. Scholars have a tradition they call peer review, which can help to indicate that information is authoritative and reliable. First, a scholar does research. Then the scholar reports the findings of that research in a written article. Then a group of that scholar's peers reviews the article carefully. In the process of peer review, everything is vetted, from the methodology to the ways that findings are presented as text or graphics. The scholar will usually make revisions based on peer review feedback before the article is published. From the reader's point of view, this means that a peer-reviewed article has a high degree of acceptance among scholars in the field. Peer-reviewed information is often called scholarly information. Let's turn next to currency. Sometimes it is important to use current information, but not always. Often the importance of currency depends on the subject matter. Consider the social sciences. In fields like history, the point is not that recent information is always best, but that the date of information matters. For example, an analysis written shortly after a major event may not be as useful as one written much later, when journals and letters of people involved in the event have been published. Thinking about the date of information is important in other ways, too. A public opinion poll about military spending can be heavily influenced if it is timed near an event such as a terrorist bombing or a military action resulting in civilian deaths. In contrast, currency of information is very important in the sciences. Scientific research builds continuously upon prior research. Scientists tend to value the most current information available because new developments in their field will inform their own research. Practitioners such as doctors obviously want to know about the most recent research when they are selecting a course of treatment for a patient. Finally, let's consider completeness. Quality information presents all the relevant facts and context. Research that claims to explain the causes of an event or social phenomenon needs to be complete. For example, is homelessness the result of only economic factors, or are there cultural, educational, psychological, and even geographical influences? In researching issues where stakeholders have opposing viewpoints, completeness of information is essential and may require consulting many different sources and evaluating how bias may affect these sources. Ultimately, there are no simple checklists for evaluating information. Putting information in context and thinking about its objectivity, accuracy, authority, currency, and completeness requires reflection, critical thinking, and asking the right kinds of questions about the information we encounter.